Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we look back at history, it's super easy to focus on how absolute power is built, right? The massive rallies, the relentless propaganda, that terrifying grip of control. But today, we're flipping the script. We are looking at the exact opposite end of the timeline. We're going to objectively examine the gripping final 24 to 48 hours of three of history's most infamous dictators, to uncover how their collapsing regimes perfectly mirrored their ultimate demise.
So, when empires totally crumble, what actually happens to the untouchable men who ruled them? Well, we're going to skip any kind of formal agenda today and just jump straight into the bunker to find out. We're exploring the really stark contrasts between three completely different endings to absolute power: suicide, public vengeance, and state-orchestrated theater.
Let's start with part 1, Adolf Hitler and the bunker suicide.
Picture this. It's late April 1945. Soviet tanks are literally rumbling through the streets of Berlin, and Adolf Hitler knows his empire has completely crumbled. The guy who once commanded millions is now trapped underground, basically like a rat in a concrete bunker beneath the Reich Chancellor. And things deteriorated incredibly fast for his shrinking circle of loyalists. On April 29th, in a totally bizarre midnight ceremony given the circumstances, he marries his longtime companion, Eva Braun. The very next day, April 30th, he says his final goodbyes. And then, right around 3:30 in the afternoon, as Soviet artillery heavily booms in the distance just above their heads, he and Eva retreat into their private quarters for the very last time.
Now, what happened next, behind those closed doors, was confirmed by the people who found them. The mechanics of their demise were pretty swift. Hitler actually bit into a cyanide capsule and shot himself in the head at the exact same time. Eva died right beside him, having only consumed the poison. But the plan didn't stop at death. To prevent their bodies from being captured by the advancing Soviets, they were quickly carried up the bunker stairs, completely doused with gasoline in the Chancery Garden, and set ablaze.
So here's the absolute kicker. By choosing this self-inflicted end, this 56-year-old dictator, a man who had sent millions to their deaths in camps and on battlefields, entirely evaded legal judgment. He took the easy way out, leaving behind nothing but charred remains and a legacy of absolute horror. News of his death marked the end of the European theater of World War II, but because of the messy nature of his disposal, his death instantly spawned decades of wild conspiracy theories about whether he truly died or somehow escaped.
Moving on to part 2, Benito Mussolini and a brutal case of public vengeance. While Hitler hid underground, the Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini spent his final hours desperately running. Think about it. The guy who used to strut on balconies preaching about a new Roman Empire is now disguised in a bulky German military coat trying to flee to Switzerland. But on April 27, 1945, communist partisans stopped a convoy near Lake Como and found Il Duce hiding there like a common criminal. They pulled him and his mistress Clara Petacci from the convoy and held them overnight. The very next day, a partisan leader named Walter Adazio shows up with orders. Mussolini and Petacci were taken to a villa gate in the tiny village of Giulino di Mezzegra and executed with a submachine gun. After that, the partisans loaded their bodies into a van for a highly symbolic trip to Milan. Now, pay attention to this number, 15. The partisans didn't just drive his body to Milan's Piazzale Loreto randomly. No, they deliberately brought him to that exact spot because, months earlier, Mussolini's regime had executed exactly 15 partisans and left their bodies on display right there. It was a calculated, brutal act of historical symmetry. Now it was his turn to be put on display. When that van arrived at dawn on April 29th, the bodies were just dumped on the ground. A crowd gathered super quickly, and let me tell you, things got ugly fast. It was pure, chaotic mob vengeance. People were kicking the corpses, spitting on them, even firing at them again. In fact, one woman reportedly stepped up and fired 5 more times into Mussolini's body, 1 shot for each of her 5 dead sons. And then came the finale. The bodies were hung upside down from the roof of a gas station. The crowd went absolutely wild, jeering and celebrating beneath them. This visceral flash of violence across the world really signaled the definitive, undeniable collapse of fascist Italy. Okay, before we move to our final case study, let's just contrast those incredibly violent public demises of World War II leaders with a more modern autocrat. It's wild to think about. On one hand, you have wartime leaders at ages 56 and 61 meeting these violent, chaotic ends. And on the other, you have the modern dictator who actually manages to outlive his enemies, reaching old age and dying peacefully, completely insulated by the state apparatus he built.
Which brings us to part 3, Kim Jong-il and the spectacle of theatrical grief.
Kim Jong-il ruled North Korea with an iron grip for 17 years. He cultivated a personality cult so extreme that state propaganda literally claimed he could control the weather and didn't even need to use the bathroom. But in December 2011, this supposedly superhuman figure died from something decidedly human, a massive heart attack on a moving train. When state media finally announced it 2 days later, a television anchor named Ri Chan-hee, dressed in all black and openly weeping, delivered this exact quote. She claimed he passed during a great mental and physical strain while dedicating himself to the nation.
The reality of his failing health was, of course, heavily suppressed. Official reports later noted the 69-year-old had actually been suffering from diabetes and heart disease for years, all totally hidden from the public to maintain that superhuman image. But when the news broke, state media broadcast this surreal theatrical grief. You had citizens completely collapsing, wailing in the streets, and bowing before his portraits. And honestly, whether that grief was genuine indoctrination or just absolute terrifying fear, the spectacle was unbelievable. In the end, his body was embalmed and placed on display in a glass coffin at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun in Pyongyang, lying in state right alongside his father.
Unlike the fascist dictators we just talked about, who are either cornered underground or literally executed by furious citizens, Kim Jong-il passed away from natural causes. He never faced a single ounce of justice for the starvation, the imprisonment, and the execution of countless North Koreans over his 17-year rule. Because he died comfortably inside his own highly controlled regime, power was seamlessly handed right over to his son, Kim Jong-un, ensuring the dynasty continued with absolutely zero accountability. And honestly, looking at these three together brilliantly illustrates our findings today. We have Adolf Hitler opting for self-inflicted isolation and suicide to evade justice. We have Benito Mussolini facing incredibly violent, chaotic public retribution. And then we have Kim Jong-il dying naturally, kicking off surreal state theater. The collapse of absolute power takes drastically different shapes, depending on whether the regime falls from the outside, from within, or if it just manages to outlive its own creator.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about these historical titans for a second. These were men who shaped the 20th and 21st centuries through absolute terrifying control. Do you think their final moments, whether burning in a garden, hanging from a gas station, or lying in a glass coffin, truly represent justice? Was it just a cowardly escape, or do they merely represent the inevitable decay of autocracy? Ask yourself what these final hours truly reveal about the nature of unchecked power. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the history behind the headlines.